One rap singer said it arrogantly, yes, but very powerfully. I don't care who writes a nation's laws. Let me just write its songs. He expressed in these statements the idea that it doesn't really matter what is put down by the letter of the law. What really matters and determines behavior is what individuals have learned and hold to in the innermost parts of their soul. Learning. It's a term very different from schooled. It's a term very different from educated. It is a thing we do through the entire course of our life. From cradle to the grave, we are in the process of learning. One big question that the pandemic has forced us to be able to think about is the question of, are we creating lifelong learners, or are we merely taking people through a system of schooling? If we are going to raise an authentic generation, this question becomes completely unavoidable. We need to begin rethinking of our learning systems for a couple of reasons. One reason being that individuals are ending up at the schooling process with a bunch of skills that they either have not fully internalized or which are completely irrelevant. Secondly, though they go through school and are able to get a couple of grades, it is becoming worrisomely apparent that they do not possess the tools to become lifelong learners. At many graduation ceremonies, the commissioning individual, mostly the chancellor, will utter those words, "I give you the power to read and to do all that appertains to your course of study." It is therefore seemingly understood that one of the objectives of the schooling process is to empower the schooled individual to become a lifelong learner. But with many industries, especially those that require handiwork like welding, carpentry, electrical, plumbing, reporting not only stellar drops in interest, but also drops in perfection and finesse. And also seemingly, when it seems that performance in subjects like math and the science seems to be on the decline, the question about what are people learning, and more importantly, how do they learn so that they become lifelong learners, will be able to be an important question. But finally, everything in life that is worth having is built. It's not bought. And so similarly, there's a lot to learn away from the classrooms, which needs to exactly be done that way. It needs to be learned. And if the next generation is not a generation of learners, if it is a generation where if something is longer than the characters on Twitter, or it is not as fascinating as the features on TikTok, then they will not be able to learn. We have a crisis upon our hands. It's a crisis of learning. There's a meme that does rounds, and it's meant to be funny, but it's also full of insights. The meme asks, did you go through school? Did school go through you? Or are you more like me? You just walked around school and after a period of time they decided, okay, let's get you out. Yes, it's meant to be funny, but you know when it's Acacia, it's not just about humor, it's about an authentic conversation about chats you and I would like to avoid. And yes, because this is season 2, we're talking about raising an authentic generation. And in today's time together, we need to begin looking at how we raising a generation of learners who will be able to learn the wisdom of the past, the wisdom of the present, and be able to transmit it to the next generation. How will they be able to transform what they learn into solutions that solve problems of now, but create the opportunities for tomorrow? Are we raising thinkers, or are we merely raising reflectors of thought? Again, this is season 2 of an authentic conversation about chats you and I would rather avoid. Specifically in season 2, we're talking about raising an authentic generation, and today we're looking at a learning generation. Welcome. As we continue to follow up with our prodigal son, It's interesting what you begin popping from him. I want you to consider this verse and then let's unpack it for a minute. And this is Luke chapter 11 from verses 13 through to 16.
Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything."
From the reading of the verse, a few things are clear. One way or the other, the prodigal son learnt, because the scripture is clear. It says, not too long after he had received the portion of wealth from his father, he went to a faraway country, and the first thing he did is he joined himself to the people there. I work as a learning consultant. I design learning experiences, and right there, maybe because of my experience, what jumps out to me is one of the key components of any learning environment. As a matter of fact, every learning environment has 3 things, all of them with the letter C. There's what we call cognition, there's what you call creation, and there's what you call community. Let me break them down and show you this from the passage. Cognition is the material you learn. It's the theory part of learning, if you'd like to call it that way. For instance, if I wanted you to stitch me a coat, a jacket, I'd take you through cognition, which is the theory on how to cut the pieces, and the theory about fabric selection, and the theory about stitching, and maybe even the history of coats and their function. That's cognition. You get cognition from either books, you could get cognition from watching other people, you could get cognition from the internet. And in an information age like we're living, cognition is not very difficult because information is ubiquitous, it is easily available. The second piece is called creation. Creation involves how do we take what we have what we have put into the mind, and how do we transform it from the mind to the hands? How do we take what we have learned mentally and be able to transform it into services or goods? In more technical language, we call it artifacts. But simply that means stuff that we have learned and are then able to create. And often the evidence of learning is not the ability to regurgitate or tell again the theory you've been told. The actual ultimate evidence of learning is the ability to transform information into products and services. And the ultimate proof of superior learning is the ability to make goods and services that are able to solve needs and to create opportunities. So there's cognition, there's creation, and then the third one is community. Community are the people you make things with or the people you make things for. In any proper learning process, there's always community. The community are people that give you feedback. They give you access to more resources you can use to be able to improve on your craft. There are people who at times will pick up the very things you learn. That forms what you call your learning community. It could range from your classmates to people you are on some social media platform who you're doing whichever thing, making meetings or cooking a meal together or planning a hike or learning the way to prepare for the next triathlon. That's your community that helps you to learn. Now again, those are 3 C's. If you want to think about it, think of it like a triangle. One tip is cognition, one edge is creation, and the other one is community. In our case about raising an authentic generation, as we walk through the story of the prodigal son, you realize that the first thing that the prodigal boy does when he goes away from home is he gets community. He joins himself to them. And then immediate next words it says, and he wasted his substance on riotous living. It's very clear what he learned from them was not very helpful. At least in an economic sense, it wasn't powerful, because the information he gotten from them, the community that he joined himself to, resulted in him wasting his substance. I like the old English on that one, because in including the word substance, it does not just limit it to money. It broadens the entire spectrum so that one can see the full impact of the failure of a learning system, that it doesn't just waste money, it wastes substance, yeah? It even wastes life itself. But it is therefore apparent that after he is broke and then soon there is a famine, this boy goes to another phase of learning where he now joins himself to a new community. It so turns out that this one was a farmer who put him in charge of pigs. And again there, he learns a new thing, which was the ability to subsist, or at least he desired to subsist, on that which belonged to the pigs. It was learning. It was not stuff that you and I may really want to learn, but right there you see learning in progress. Let me put it to you this way. This boy learns out in the world things he didn't learn at home, but also it in part shows that there might have been a breakdown in something he should have learned at home, which made him completely unfitted for the life outside of home. Something in either his failure to learn at home or something about the learning environment of home was amiss, such that when he leaves from it and he begins trying to function in a world away from home, he is completely out of his depth. What was true with the prodigal son is, sadly, yet powerfully, very true in our quest to raise an authentic generation. We have mastered some form of indoctrination, but we probably have not yet become very good at learning. Indoctrination is forcing knowledge into people, while on the other side, true learning brings out knowledge that brings out wisdom in an individual. Two very different things. So be careful about the wrong method of gaining knowledge and of trying to impart wisdom, because one is indoctrination that does not work. The other one is true learning or true education, which actually works. A question each person needs to grapple with, whether it is the next generation that is coming up, or whether those who are coming alongside them and trying to raise an authentic generation, is we need to settle this question of learning. Because learning forms the continuity, the chain of continuity from one generation's wisdom to another. In a very realistic sense, we stand on the shoulders of those who've come before us. We are only able to keep advancing because of the blood, the sweat, the toil, and the tears that those before us have been able to put out. The people who developed modern day phone applications are only able to do that because those who'd come before them and had developed the algorithms and made internet possible had done their work. And those who developed the internet were dependent upon predecessors who had created complex mathematical platforms that even made it possible to think about something as complex as the internet. And therefore you begin immediately recognizing, whether it's in the home, in state, in society, or even in the church, a failure in learning or a diminishing in the capacity for an individual or a group of individuals to learn poses an enormous threat to the success of the next generation. More importantly, a few things that are compromising the ability of this generation to become lifelong learners and impactful learners is probably still mirrored in the story of the prodigal son. He was attracted to a faraway country, and there he joined himself to individuals whose objective was spending their life on riotous living. And this undermined his capacity to either learn or to learn that which was important. In similar ways, one of the big challenges in raising an authentic generation now is that we are living at a time when, just like in the story of the prodigal son, we're living through a time when it is possible to inform, to educate the mind devoid of a conscience through the tool or the medium of the eye. In other words, it is what we are beholding around us that is trying to shape what the mind will become. But then in the process, what has been quietened completely out of the process is a conscience. And the net result is we have a lot of excitement, but maybe way little education than should be. We're probably not raising individuals who are thinking. The second thing is the information age is brilliant, but with a flood of information that has come in, we equally have reduced our ability to have concentration. You see, in the 1800s, any information I needed to learn, I had to read it diligently and compare. And as a result, my mind would expand if I was somebody living in the 1800s. But in this time, information has become bite-sized. It's become smaller, perhaps more targeted, yes, maybe more focused. But with this way of consuming information has come the over-zeroing in things so that people will know quite an amount about so little, about really nothing. And then the ability to flex the mind and to discipline it, to think from cause to effect, to link one thing to the other is rapidly reduced. If something is not the size of a tweet, if a solution is not the length of a text, if our explanation is not the length of a TikTok video, we are raising a generation that is completely incapable to then engage beyond that. We may call it living on the fast lane, but the effect and the impact it is having on the mind, and more importantly, the effect it is having on our capacity to learn religious, social, historical, and important information is rapidly being reduced. Besides, individuals' balance is greatly compromised because in the era of over-specialization, individuals begin knowing so much more about very little things. And therefore, individuals have got very little wide knowledge and very deep on only very few things. There's indeed a crisis. Ultimately, it is shown in the ability, in the loss or the reduction of the ability of people to reason for themselves. Look at the number of things we now have to automate. Not because in many cases we become more busy, but because the retentive abilities of our memories are reduced, or because our reliance on the conveniences has been enhanced. Hey, I'm not opposed to them, but I'm just raising the alarm that, hey, we probably are failing to raise an authentic generation through the lack of discipline of the mind. It is a rule of existence that the mind expands proportionately to how it is exercised and to what it is focused on. The mind is like a muscle. And so the same way you don't go to a gym and keep lifting a perfume can, but you exert weight to it so that the muscle can be able to enlarge. Similarly, the mind will also expand depending with the level of appropriate taxation that is placed on it. But in this age and time, we're having learning disabilities because of the too much distractions, a lot of overstimulation, and the reduction of attention span that we are facing. And indeed, we are walking into a time when we have an inauthentic generation because it is a generation that is not learning. The Bible gives us a few ideas on how we can raise an authentically learning generation. God, in His work of making a new generation that was moving from a previous life of 400 years of slavery and walking into new possibilities, did take some time to prioritize the question of educating and equipping the next generation for the task that was ahead of them. Moses is the author of this book. It has a fairly weird name. It's called Deuteronomy. In Swahili, it's called Kumbukumbu la Torati, which is the memory of the law. It's the law told again. And God had taken time to give laws on literally everything, laws on health, laws on relationship. And here is Him giving us a few ideas on education. In the 6th chapter, or the 6th major division of that book called Deuteronomy, written by Moses, He says this from verse 5. He says, "These words that I tell to you today shall remain in your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children. When thou shalt sit down, when thou liest down, when thou walkest about, and you shall put them as sign or as frontlets before your eyes." This is God preparing the people of Israel, these former slaves whom he's taking into this new dispensation. He's raising another generation he wants to be authentic, a generation of real people with real skills to be able to transform the real world they're going into. And in those snippets of scripture, you realize God gives them three things that would help them be able to be lifelong learners and lifelong transformers. Or as somebody says, leaders read. You need to remember that. Leaders read and readers lead. So if you want to be with them, let's look what God says. So the first thing he says, "These words that I give to you shall be in you." Being in you means they need to be held by the teacher before they can be imparted to the learner. So God is prescribing a methodology where the first thing to build minds of lifelong learners is to discipline the mind in the art of holding attention, holding information, holding perspective, holding focus. If you've ever done anything close to teaching a child, you understand the value of this. That you cannot be yourself distracted, or you cannot be shallow in what you want to teach if you're going to become effective at teaching children. So God, in preparing a mental discipline, the first prescription he gives is a prescription that includes the learning, the discipline of holding yourself before him, holding your mind before the information you want to consume for long and disciplined enough that you may be able to understand it in its various dimensions. Holding here also means it being so internalized that it becomes part and parcel of the person who is willing and ready to impart it. A lot of us are so dependent on retrieving of information quickly. Now, I'm not opposed to that, but we need to begin realizing that there's a long-term dividend we lose because of that kind of learning. If we are not going to place ourselves in places where we learn information that is important and learn to hold it, I fear that we will become so tech dependent. I fear that we will be becoming so other people dependent in terms of the ability to collate various pieces of information so that they will be able to be of use. So in raising an authentic generation, tip number one is we need to begin developing the discipline to hold our attention, the discipline to hold our focus, the discipline to be able to hold what is important within the mind. And the mind will expand proportionate to what is held as most important. Number two, the Bible in Deuteronomy 6 states the need for the mind to retain things. It needs to be engaged. That is why Moses says, you'll do this when you're seated, you'll do this when you're walking, you'll put it as signs, you will do everything. So the second thing is to engage. In order for us to raise an authentic generation, we need to be able to design our learning environments, whether it's the church or our classes, as environments where the learners are engaged. Long gone is the dispensation where the teacher was the dispenser and the learners were the consumers, where the preacher was the dispenser and the congregation were merely but passive consumers. Such form of learning, such form of information sharing is not synonymous with learning and will not be fruitful. And that is why in God's idea of creating a learning generation, he does not separate between the learner and the instructor. He actually begins by telling the instructor to possess, to hold these things, and then for the instructor to come near to the learner and engage them. We need to begin becoming teachers like the best teacher I believe who existed, who is Jesus, able to do. He was able to move from the abstract to the known by simply counting on the things people could see. To tell the impact he believed the next generation of Christians would have, he pointed them to the salt. to show the impact of what the kingdom of God was. He looked at a fishing village and pointed to the net. To speak about the need for preparation for a time that is coming ahead, he looked at a wedding feast and said the kingdom of God would be like bridesmaids who are going for a wedding occasion. And so for us to engage this generation, we not only need to make class more exciting, we not only need to make it more vibrant, but we need to make it relevant. Adult learners and lifelong learners are learners who will only pick that which comes across as relevant. The push should always be for the three things. Clarity, that what people need to learn should be clear. It should be clear why they're learning it. It should be clear what they need to know. But it should also be things they can apply. Many learners will switch off the moment they do not see the bridge built between the information they're gathering and the world in which they are meant to operate within. So to create lifelong learners, we'll need clarity, but also we'll need application. And then the third thing it'll need is relevance. If the information is deemed to be irrelevant, it will not be consumed. And as the mind discards it, so does the mind shrink its capacity to be able to gather more important information. So trick number one in creating a generation of lifelong learners is to develop the discipline of holding. The second trick is to do the thing called engaging. And engaging is not just a new bell or whistle or more colors. It's being able to make sure that the learning experience is clear, it's relevant, and it's things people can apply. And then the third and final tip that God says is, I want you to hang these things as signs on your hands. I want you to put them as frontlets in front of your eyes. I want you to put them as on your doors and everywhere. So the information that they were being given was not just meant to remain in a book or in the head. It was meant to be able to impact and create visible, tangible, useful, memorable things. If we are to create lifelong learners, we need to divest from the entire idea of learning for its own sake, but then begin heavily investing in the concept of learning by doing and learning for doing. The separation between class and workshop needs to be removed. We need to go away from learning systems, whether it is church on a Sabbath or whether it is class on the weekday, that seems to suggest that you go away to some place to learn or gather information and then go to another place to do. That system has seen most education systems spend 16 or so years people gathering information, and by the time they arrive at the workforce, it's completely obsolete information. A more progressive, biblical-centered method to prepare to raise the next generation is individuals who are able to rapidly build the bridge so that learning is through doing. It is not merely the accumulation of more information. So maybe even where faith is struggling and where people are looking for opportunities to make sense about their own faith, the problem may not be another Bible study or another tract. The challenge might actually be giving people the information in such a way that they learn it as they do it. It is true we have a crisis of learning. It is true that if this crisis is not resolved, there will be an immense challenge. But it is actually true that it is possible to raise an authentic generation of learners by following the biblical admonition of three simple things we could do. Number one is to learn to build the discipline of holding our focus, holding our attention, holding our memory so that it will strengthen with use. Number two, it is to create learning environments that are engaging because they're clear, relevant, and applicable. And number three, it is to move from learning to do and begin to learn by doing. And that way, we will be able to raise a thinking, learning, authentic generation. Till next time, stay with Acacia and let us raise an authentic generation.